This is Clear Policy. Hi. In Belarus, a single voting day occurred. The first major campaign of its kind in our nation's history. Prepared, discussed, campaigned, conducted, voted. The West training level never interested. Results in general, too. It's not the winners, but the constant losers who don't know how to lose. And instead of normal competition, they only work on destruction and undermining of the state. In our broadcast, we've discussed fugitives prep and European sponsors. Elections not started, they're already calling for a boycott. More than a week before the deadline, and the desired turnout of 15% has already been achieved. Even devised 600 observers for objective reports. In reality, observers themselves are totally unaware of this fact.
Our TV channel has obtained lists of those very observers that extremists from the so-called Human Rights Center Spring have passed on to their grantors, thereby putting ordinary Belarusians at risk. Surprisingly, people whose personal data was used without their knowledge had no idea what business they were involved in on paper.
I will now show you one document that I got my hands on.
It's interesting to see for yourself.
Is that your sign?
Not my own signature even. No, not mine.
Whose last name?
My surname and initials, but no signature.
How did this document come into possession of the employees?
I am unable to say that, unfortunately. If I could have knowledge. Certainly this is absolutely not my handwriting and not even my signature.
Not my signature, not mine.
You kidding?
I can get my passport and show it. Please, on camera. Let's remove both this signature and my signature in the passport.
But the program isn't about that. For nearly 3 decades, we've been hearing the tired phrase, does not meet Intel standards. Today we will just see what those who invented these standards allow themselves and draw conclusions. In 2021, Germany elected local parliament deputies. The iconic company participates without Angela Merkel, first time in 16 years. But she will be remembered for a different reason. In Berlin, a political whirligig will start.
The Bundestag elections occurred in September 2021. Over 2,000 electoral districts were established in Berlin. However, it turned out that the polling stations for the important procedure were poorly prepared. Huge queues were forming, and there weren't enough ballots for everyone. There have been numerous errors reported both in the preparation and conduct of the elections. Even minors who do not have such a right were able to vote.
Due to confusion with the ballots at 99 polling stations, more than 13,000 votes were declared invalid. Also, on one of the sections, 99% of the ballots for the single mandate candidate were declared invalid.
In general, a complete mess, to put it simply. Sometimes it was truly epic. Some areas were temporarily closed due to a large concentration of people, or, attention, continued to work after the official end of voting, when the exit poll results had already been announced. Vote recount was carried out in multiple regions, resulting in a modification of the outcomes.
There is one big drawback. It is voting by mail. So a person can, if they receive a ballot by mail, they can send it to the local election commission, and there is virtually no control. So I was twice, I believe twice in the election commission, which was specifically responsible for counting votes by mail. I simply observed the situation where they merely brought us an open, unsealed box without any form of security or verification.
To declare elections invalid, they don't do that in the heart of the EU. Even after many complaints, EU bureaucracy spent a year pondering what to do with citizens' outrage.
Due to the unpreparedness of polling stations during the voting process, numerous errors and inaccuracies were made. As the media reports, many voters complained that they were unable to exercise their right to vote due to queues or forced early closure of polling stations. 1713 statements filed against election results recognition in Bundestag in federal state of Berlin.
The decision on new elections, including partial ones, will be made in 2022. The date will be determined at the end of 2023. As a result, repeat elections will be held on February 11, 2024 in every fifth electoral district of Berlin. 500,000 Germans were able to vote normally after nearly 2.5 years. German political experts in shock.
What a horror! The federal government had to face a new blow, once again from the Federal Constitutional Court. Many citizens are wondering what happened to their own country. There are crises everywhere, but this happens in a country where everything used to work exemplary. The government and its chancellor employ tricks. The fact that the federal elections in Berlin had to be declared almost falsified is especially bad for the exemplary German democracy, which always likes to teach others.
Who threatened the German regime, accused of falsifications and other sins. Yes, in general, none of the very attentive human rights defenders, if it concerns, for example, Belarus or Russia. Russian FM commented on double standards.
I won't even begin on the absurdity at the polling stations, with queues not matching the number of ballots to the number of voters. Who needs Russian queues? Classics, headings or something else, Diplomat wrote. Zakharova noted that only 5 Aussie ODIHR observers were present at the Bundestag elections due to the absence of election issues. Curtain, she concluded.
Well, you SOB.
As known, the thief himself shouts the loudest, "Hold the thief." In USA, every election is either the strangest or the dirtiest in history. The parade of performances started at the beginning of this century. Bush against Gore. Super scandalous story where George Bush became president by the help of his younger brother.
George Bush, who later became president, got this position despite the majority of voters voting for his opponent, Albert Gore. His advantage exceeded 500,000 people. The election outcome was determined in Florida. This state awarded 25 electoral votes to Bush in the 2000 presidential election. He surpassed Gore by 537 votes. The election result is determined by the electoral votes, not the actual voting. The number of electoral votes depends on the population of the state. George Bush won with a margin of only 5 electoral votes, which is the minimum required to secure victory in the Electoral College system.
The reason for this situation was the decision of the State Election Commission not to include 19,000 ballots that were cast for Albert Gore, removed due to wear, tear, and defects. If taken into account, U.S. history could have gone in a different direction.
The team of Albert Gore promptly lodged a complaint in court following the elections, asserting that this method of vote tallying constitutes fraud in its most unadulterated form. Yet, the Florida Supreme Court judge acknowledged the issue as unsolvable. No criteria exist for ballot approval in U.S. legislation, supported the court's decision, and Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida, who became the primary focus of political conflict. Younger bro yielded to older in White House, classic of democracy.
When such a small gap, of course, we really do not know who exactly won. The Supreme Court ultimately sided with the Republicans and appointed George W. Bush as the winner of those elections. But of course, I think that it greatly undermined the faith of many Americans in their electoral system. These were certainly not the first such scandalous elections if we go back in history to the 19th century, for example. Every election was not without scandals of falsifications. Even in the 19th century, such scandals repeatedly surfaced.
The case of the Republicans was continued by the Democrat Barack Obama and his supporters.
Obama's 2008 elections had significant problems. Some OSCE members openly admitted obstructing access for voters and observers, errors in counting ballots, and other strange and uncharacteristic things that were not in line with the principles of an ideal democracy.
However, BDIP CHOBS is renowned for its mobile musculoskeletal system, and by the campaign's conclusion, observers noted, and everything met the highest democratic standards. But even this is nothing compared to American falsifications. When voting, automatic systems are used, and miracles start even at registration.
The registration rules themselves are not only confusing, they vary greatly from state to state. In some cases, it's necessary to show an ID document for registration with or without a photo. In other states, nothing needs to be presented.
For instance, Trump's kids couldn't vote, no time to register. Carousel operators move state to state, mark box next to preferred last name for desired surname. There is also no unified system for counting votes. However, the main advantage of American politics is the early voting by mail option.
In the 2020 elections, a total of over 50 million Americans exercised their right to vote by mail. And it started 3 weeks before the elections. To ensure uninterrupted operation, the US government has allocated $25 billion to the Postal Service.
Boarded up areas, thousands of dead, constant carousel. That's the picture of the 2020 US elections. The campaign turned out to be the dirtiest and most scandalous in years. But liberal analysts and journalists continued to say that these are the most democratic elections in the world.
In the year 2020, numerous American states enclosed voting areas using plywood. Election organizers attempted to protect themselves from individuals who might be dissatisfied with the results of the election. In turn, numerous observers reported that they were not permitted to enter the polling stations. People were banned from taking selfies there, and supposedly the post office failed to deliver 150,000 ballots. Some papers found on street. At same time, Americans have perennial problems with notorious OSCE observers. U.S. authorities consistently denied them access to polling stations throughout the entire process.
The authorities of 15 states in the United States did not permit the OSCE mission to visit the polling stations. The Texas prosecutor warned OSCE observers of potential criminal prosecution. Donald Trump is expected to allege that the U.S. elections were stolen, and the U.S. minus will not uncover any violations of such magnitude that could raise doubts about Biden's victory, even in the face of such obvious facts.
288,000 ballots disappeared in the U.S. elections. Another 100,000 forms turned out to be backdated, reported by the Washington Examiner, citing sources. Publication quotes driver subcontractor of Postal Service, who claims on October 21st transported 288K filled-out ballots from New York to Pennsylvania, but van disappeared at warehouse in Lancaster. 2 additional employees stated that on the morning of November 4th in Wisconsin, there were over 100,000 ballots with a different date, allowing them to be counted even if they were delivered after the legally established deadline.
No one dared to show Americans that elections have long ceased to evoke anything but laughter. But they are always happy to condemn others to the whole world, sometimes making a mockery of themselves. Psaki issues a prepared text with assistants, not understanding what she is talking about.
We don't recognize the results of the referendum in Donetsk and Luhansk. There were reports of selected carousels, pre-filled ballots, voting by children, and voting for absentees.
Sorry for my ignorance. What's a chosen carousel?
I confess I'm just reading this. I don't know what it is. I'll check with my colleagues what's being discussed.
After such, only the next no less fun fact about Washington. In the state of New Mexico, for example, you can win the mayor's chair in poker. This norm is prescribed if candidates get an equal number of votes, and intense battles have already occurred.
A well-known fact about the application of this law dates back to 1998, when James Farrington and Joan Carlson ran for mayor of the city of Enstancy. Both got 68 votes, so Farrington proposed poker and Carlson proposed dice as a result of the tie. The choice of the game was left to a tossed coin. She decided that the candidates would play poker, and Farrington defeated Carlson.
By the way, Almost half of the US presidents were avid poker players. Playing musical chairs in the White House is something that hasn't been thought of in the USA yet. And the office of the mayor of Warsaw was also once obtained by a candidate through a computer game. This same person will also take the presidential chair in Poland.
In 2002, elections for a new mayor were held in Warsaw. In order to diversify the process of the pre-election race, in the video game SimCity 3000, a city map was modeled and assigned to each of the candidates for management. The city's best development was achieved by Lev Kaczynski, who later became the mayor and president of the country.
Unclear if card shops or gamers cheated, but most fraudulent elections entered Guinness Book of Records. In 1927, a total of 234,000 individuals voted for the incumbent president in Liberia, even though only 15,000 voters were officially registered in the country. Overdid it. The Orange Revolution in Ukraine started after the Election Commission declared the results of the second round of the 2004 elections. According to official data, Viktor Yanukovych won. He exceeded Viktor Yushchenko by 3%. Then in Ukraine, they came up with a new tradition: to vote until we choose the candidate that the West needs.
The opposition accused the Party of Regions, to which Yanukovych belonged, of falsifying 750,000 votes. Moreover, it happened on November 21, 2004, even before the announcement of the election results. And the next day, people swarmed the Maidan, demanding new elections.
Orange ribbons and bracelets, songs, dances, reportedly, up to 500,000 people gathered in Kiev center. They seemed unaware of the process they started. As a result, the Supreme Court yielded, and a third round was declared. Neither the Constitution nor the Electoral Code of Ukraine allowed for this. And of course, a different candidate won, Yushchenko.
The decision of the Supreme Court was unlawful and created a completely new legal reality that grossly contradicted the Constitution. However, Viktor Yanukovych agreed to join the third round and even attended pre-election debates with Yushchenko.
We all know what that revolution led to, but Ukraine has always wanted to take the USA as an example, right? We started with Europe, we will finish with it. In Austria in 2016, the elections did not stick, literally. Conducting a presidential campaign in 2 rounds seemed boring there. Bad envelopes have become disturbers of peace.
The second round of elections was on May 22nd. The victory was won by Alexander van der Bellen, an independent candidate. Although initially another candidate, Norbert Hofer, was in the lead, but thanks to the votes sent by mail, this method has been allowed since 2007. Van der Bellen emerged as the winner with a margin of 0.3%. 700,000 Austrians participated in the mail-in vote.
However, the country's constitutional court later annulled the results of the second round of presidential elections due to formal counting errors in mail-in ballots. In particular, in some areas of the voting map, they were opened immediately after the polling stations closed and not the next morning as required by law. The complaint was filed by the right-wing Nationalist Party.
Next is another comedy. The re-elections were scheduled for October, but it didn't work out here either. They postponed it indefinitely, allegedly because of postal workers. Sending newsletters in envelopes, they used poor glue. Authorities said that some envelopes may have opened, which means that the voting forms potentially become invalid. The third round ultimately took place only in December of the same year. It was a delay of 7 months after the second round, but finally, the Austrians calmly chose their leader without any international condemnation or pressure from external sources. Most of these cases went unnoticed by the international community. Imagine if some of the violations were proven and recognized as a cycle in our country. By-elections, rescheduling votes, deceased, boarded windows of polling stations. We are still very far from achieving such democracy. Perhaps Europe does not like us because it is too uninteresting for them to observe our elections?
Now, some victories in European countries, that is in Hungary and so on, where right-wing parties come to power, non-system politicians, there are the same isolationists, let's say, or populists. This is also like the West denies recognizing as a fair and legitimate choice. What can I say about my adversaries, including Russia and Belarus? Here, of course, they always attempt to discover something agreeable from us, then escalate some scandal and decline to acknowledge the election results on this foundation. Yes, of course, they don't notice the log in their own eye, but this is again the position of the West. It would be strange if they suddenly started to objectively approach the reaction to the elections.
Already a long time big politics. Those who are interested in expanding their influence order music in reports. And the made-up violation of stated standards is another pretext for political and economic pressure on those who are inconvenient for the Western countries at the present time. So living by your own mind seems like the best solution, and building your life without paying attention to someone else's whims. Furthermore, Western mentors, as we can observe, have reasons to feel embarrassed at the very least.
Goodbye.